Greetings everyone, and welcome to this month's DBT skill lesson. The first 3 months of the year we talked about mindfulness. This month we're pivoting to another module of DBT, which is distress tolerance. Each module of DBT builds off of the previous one, so that's why we started off with mindfulness skills. It is our base, it is our foundation of dialectical behavioral therapy. So all of the skills that I talk about in this month and any month moving forward, it's going to have a root of mindfulness in it. Now, I think why I really appreciate this module of distress tolerance, one, because it's pretty self-explanatory. We're learning how to tolerate distress. I talk about tolerating uncertainty all the time with my clients because that's what triggers anxiety so much. Tolerating or not tolerating uncertainty. And that's just one possible cause of distress. We all have different things that cause us distress. So learning how to tolerate it, so important when healing from any mental health issue. DBT in general emphasizes the benefits of learning how to deal with pain in a skillful way, right? So we're just learning the ability, we're strengthening our ability to tolerate and accept distress in this module of DBT. Why is this important? Well, unfortunately, pain, distress are a part of life. They're to be expected. They can't be entirely avoided or removed as much as we would like. So if you are unable to accept that, then yes, that itself can lead to incredible pain and suffering. Any effort to really escape pain and distress, through impulsive actions, it will interfere with your efforts to make any desired changes. Unfortunately, change is not always easy. It is going to come with its own set of stresses. So the more that we can strengthen our ability to tolerate it, handle it, and then manage it, the better off we are going to be in our healing journey. At least that's how I feel. And what they teach in DBT is that, yes, distress tolerance skills, they are a natural progression from mindfulness skills. We are learning how to accept the present moment non-judgmentally. We are perceiving our environment without putting any demands on it to be different. We are experiencing our current emotional state without attempting to change it. And we are trying to observe our own thoughts and actions without attempting to control them. And the biggest part, as always, is that it should be non-judgmental. That is that how skill, right? That I talked about last month. Now, it's still important to make this distinction that non-judgmental acceptance of reality, it is not the same as approving of reality. Tolerating or acceptance of reality is not the same as approving of reality. I have to say that to myself a lot over and over again, because sometimes it is hard to remember. Accepting it doesn't mean that you approve it or you're okay with it. So the distress tolerance behaviors targeted in DBT skills training are concerned with tolerating and surviving crises, including crises caused by addictive behaviors. The behaviors targeted in these trainings are concerned with accepting life as it is in the moment, non-judgmentally. So, when to use it, when to use distress tolerance. There's a few questions you can ask yourself to quickly determine if you're in the need for a distress tolerance skill in that moment. 1, am I able to solve the problem myself? 2, is now a good time to solve it? 3, am I in wise mind enough to solve it? If the answer is yes to those 3 questions, then proceed to solve the problem. However, if you answer no to any of those 3, am I able to solve the problem? Is now a good time to solve the problem? And am I in wise mind enough to solve the problem? Well, distress tolerance may help if the answer is no to any of those questions. Quick side note, as with anything you are learning, it's always a good idea to practice these skills when you're not in distress. That way you can really strengthen them and draw on them when you need to. Now, there are 6 categories of distress tolerance or crisis survival strategies that I'm going to talk about. I'll do 2 this month, 2 next month, and 2 the following month to wrap up our quarter of distress tolerance. The first 2 skills that I'm going to talk about for this month, the STOP skill, S-T-O-P, which is for stopping oneself from engaging in impulsive behavior. And then I'm also going to talk about pros and cons. The STOP skill. Think of a stop sign, right? Side note, what's great about DBT skills, a lot of them are acronyms that all stand for something, so it makes it easier to remember. So what does the STOP skill stand for? Well, easily enough, the S stands for stop. The T stands for take a step back. The O stands for observe. And the P is proceed mindfully. So basically, when you feel your emotions are about to take control, if you can practice this, practice the urge to just stop. Don't react, don't move a muscle, just freeze. Freezing for a moment helps prevent you from doing what your emotions may want you to do. And then, acting without thinking. So that first step in stop is to stop. Stop, freeze, take a step back. When you're faced with a difficult situation, it's hard to think about how you're going to deal with it on the spot. So you need to take some time to calm down, to get your thoughts together, to get into maybe wise mind, maybe reason mind, but to get your thoughts together so you can decide how you need to proceed in that situation, to get unstuck from what's going on. What's funny is I was telling clients to do this years before I even knew that this was a DBT skill. I just believe that we need to take the time out, stop, take a step back. We need to do that often, and it is okay. It really is okay. After you take that step back, observe. Observe what's happening around you as well as within you. That is so important. I've often just not wanted to observe or deal with what's going on inside of me before I realized what mindfulness was and how beneficial it can be. Taking a step back to observe what's going on within you is so important when you're trying to figure out how to proceed with anything, really. So not only do you observe what's happening around you, within you, but also who's around, who's involved, what are other people doing or saying. And in order to make these effective choices, we can't judge, we can't assume anything, we can't jump to conclusions. Instead, gathering the facts to understand what's going on. Using mindfulness skills of observing, like we talked about, and non-judgmentalness, like we talked about, those are so important here. And then proceed mindfully. What do I want from this situation? What are my goals? What choice might make this situation better or worse for me? Ask your wise mind how to deal with this problem. When you're calm, staying in control of your emotions, have some information about what's going on in and around us, outside of us, we're so much better prepared to deal with this situation effectively without making it worse. So, if you find yourself in a crisis and your emotions are getting really extreme and you are being pushed outside of your window of tolerance, how can we tolerate these distress feelings? One of those skills is to stop. Stop, take a step back, observe, and proceed mindfully. And that's going to take a few moments to go through those steps. It is okay. What we have is an abundance of time. There is no scarcity of time when it comes to dealing with our mental health, caring for our intense thoughts and emotions. There is always enough time to care for ourselves. Now, once you have hopefully stopped, taken a step back, observed, and you are about to proceed mindfully, But now we're still kind of struggling with two different options. We're not really sure what to do. We're in a better mindset, but we're still just not totally sure what to do when we're faced with making a decision. You may have two options. You may have more than two options. So, taking a step back and observing maybe the pros and cons of a situation can be very important. And I'm sure you've heard make a pros and cons list so many times. Again, something else I have been telling my clients for over a decade now. Pros and cons can help you resist urges to act impulsively, do things that are deconstructive, especially if you're in emotion mind. And so yes, while this may seem like a very simple exercise, it is important because, like I just said, you're not acting impulsively. You are forcing yourself to take time, take space for yourself, for your emotions, to kind of weigh out the different opportunities, possibilities that lay in front of you and how you're going to proceed with them. So, how do we do pros and cons? Pros and cons involves writing down the positive and negative consequences of tolerating distress by resisting impulsive behaviors, as well as the positive and negative consequences of not tolerating distress by engaging in compulsive behavior. So you kind of have to write a little 4-square box, advantages, disadvantages, advantages, disadvantages of acting on the crisis urges or resisting the crisis urges. What are the pros of those and what are the cons of those? So you can start by describing the crisis behavior that you're trying to stop. It could be anything that you don't really want to engage in anymore, whether it's in the short run, the long run. But if it's damaging to your self-interest and well-being, then let's make that a goal to change in some way. So let's examine the advantages and disadvantages, the pros and cons of the crisis behavior of acting on your crisis urges. Consider both short-term and long-term consequences. For example, relief and feeling better immediately may be short-term consequences of using substances, using drugs, yelling at somebody. That's a pro. Feeling relief and feeling better. Those are short-term consequences of those behaviors. But having a hangover that interferes with work, ruining a relationship due to using substances or yelling in anger, those are all cons. Those would be the long-term consequences of the same behaviors. Also consider pros and cons for each different crisis urge. So make up separate lists of pros and cons for each different crisis urge you are working on. So if you're deciding among using drugs or substances, getting out of a relationship, quitting a job, another impulsive action, it is important to consider the pros and cons of each action separately. It's also important to write separate lists for the pros and cons of not doing those things, not engaging in those actions. And that's what I don't think we always take enough time. At least I certainly haven't. The consequences of doing a thing and not doing a thing. It's important to look at both. And they are different things, that's the thing. I think we usually think that resisting an urge and not resisting an urge, they'll have the same pros and cons. They really don't. And so if you can take that time to really unpack this for yourself and break it down, you will see the differences and you'll be able to make a more informed decision about what's best for you. So I hope this helped to learn just these couple of skills. I really think if you practice them, you'll see that you use them in your daily life. If you're more mindful of how you respond to things, how you tolerate distress, I think you'll see that it gets easier over time to stop, take a step back, observe, and then decide how to proceed mindfully. And if you're still struggling with that, then don't hesitate to sit down, take some time, and make that pros and cons list of engaging in a behavior or not engaging in a behavior. I thank you so much for joining me this month as we started our next quarter of DBT skills, distress tolerance. As a certified anxiety professional, I am talking about tolerating uncertainty all the time, but that's just one type of distress. So stay with us as we unpack more of those distress tolerance skills next month. And until then, stay kind to yourself.